All right, so this is going to be our first video about copper. We're going to start with mechanical joints for copper. And the two ways that we make mechanical joints for copper are going to be flaring, and then we're also going to be talking about swedging, which is how we can take a existing piece of copper and expand it so that it can be coupled to itself. So the first thing we're going to do is take a look at some of the tools that we will be using here. So right here we have a swedging and flaring kit. These two components right here are flaring blocks or flaring yokes. They're going to hold our copper. This is actually the yoke here that's going to go over top of this tool. And then these are different tips. These tips over here on this side are for flaring, and this cone-shaped tip here that's installed is for flaring. The other straight-sided tips are for swedging. Some other tools we're going to use here, we have some tubing cutters. So we'll set one of those aside. We're going to be cleaning the copper with some type of emery cloth, and we're going to be reaming the copper with a deburring tool. So the first step here in our process is going to be to cut the copper. And to cut the copper, we're going to use a tubing cutter. And so to use a tubing cutter here, we're going to put the tube, we're going to mark the tube, and then use the tubing cutter. We're going to tighten it down onto the tube. And once it's snug on there, we're going to go around and then tighten. And we're going to snug it up just a little bit each time. And sometimes you go around a couple of turns at a time. And eventually, it will cut right through the tubing. Now, when you cut this tubing, there's going to be a small burr on the very end of the tubing pushing in, and we need to remove that. So to remove that, we're going to use our deburring tool, and this deburring tool goes inside, and we're going to spin it around like so. And that will remove that burr. Now it is ready to be flared. So to flare copper, we're going to be using a flaring block. Now you'll notice on this flaring block, there are sizes indicated here. And we are working here, what I've got in my hand is 3/8. So we'll look across here, and this hole right here is for 3/8 copper. I'm going to loosen both of these wing nuts here and open up the yoke, the block, excuse me. And I'm going to put the copper through. Now, the question is, how much copper should be sticking through? And the amount of copper sticking through should be about the thickness of a nickel, or about 1/8 of an inch. So see, you can just see that sticking through there. Now, when I tighten this down, I'm going to tighten the wing nut that's closest to the copper first. And I'm actually loosening the other one so that I can get this all the way down tight. And then that gives me the most leverage possible when I squeeze down on this end. So I'm going to go ahead and squeeze down there. And then it's time to actually create the flare. And so for that, we're going to be using this yoke here. And I'm going to back the yoke out. And then this yoke works by slipping over the copper tubing and the block. And now I'm going to slowly tighten it down. And as I tighten it down, it will center itself over that copper. And now with it centered over the copper, I'm just going to continue to tighten. And once I've tightened it all the way down, you can see that I've tightened it just about as much as it can go. I'm going to go ahead and loosen it up. And take it off. I'm going to loosen the flare nut or the wing nut that's further away first. And then loosen the nut up next to it. And that is a flare. And you can see from the end, it's nice and smooth on the inside here. There's no burrs. And this should take and make a very nice copper joint. All right, so here we have a completed flare. And this is the flare nut. And this is the fitting that flare is going to hook to. So it goes together like so. So if your flare is the proper size when you make it, the copper shouldn't extend past the fitting at all here. And it should easily slide down inside the nut. And then we can tighten that up on there. And then we would use wrenches to snug that up and make a nice tight flare connection. Now we're going to look at another way to make a flare connection. And for this, we're going to be using a spin-in bit. And so let me move this around over to here for this process. So this here is a set of spin-in flare fittings. Each one of these has a different size on it. We are going to be working with the tubing I have here is 1/4 inch tubing, and so this is a fitting for making a 1/4 inch flare. This actually goes right into the bit. This bit goes right into a drill. And when you have your piece of copper ready, you want to make sure that you put your flare nut on first. So I've cut this to length, and then I've put the flare nut on, and then you are going to spin the drill, and you got to make sure you're on your high speed, and all you do is get it spinning and push it in. And that creates what they call a 75% flare. So you'll notice if we hold this up to the fitting that's going to go on, they don't look exactly like they fit together. But when we slide the nut up and we start to tighten it on, it'll get tough at first, and then if we go ahead and tighten it further, so I've got it hand tight, and now I'm going to go ahead and tighten it on the rest of the way. And this is actually finishing the last 25% of the flare. So now it's good and tight. Now, I'm going to go ahead and open this back up just so you can see how it changed. But you can see what was not a perfect fit, now is lined up at the perfect 45-degree angle to go on. So that's another way you can make a flare connection. The drill set costs about $100, and the manual set also costs about $100. So it's kind of a toss-up cost-wise. There are times when each one will work better for you, and you may desire one or the other, and that's why I have both available to me, so that depending on the situation, I can use what's needed. If I was going to use the spin connection on a smaller piece of copper like this, I would actually use the flare block to hold on to it. And this is now a piece of 3/8 copper. So if I change the bit real quick. This will just help me have a better grip on it. And then spin it in just like that. And then use the nut, tighten the fitting, and you'd have your connection. So that's a simple flare connection.